This story actually happened. 6 demons possessed a 23-year-old student from Klingenberg, Anneliese Michel, and they didn't want to let her go. Over 9 months, Anneliese underwent 67 exorcism rituals. When that didn't help, the girl chose to starve herself. In 1976, she forced herself to stop eating, thinking that starvation would help her get rid of the devil. When she died, she weighed only 31 kilograms. "Mom," she said before the end, "I'm scared." Anneliese Michel was born in 1952 in the small town of Bavaria, Liebluffing. She received a traditional Catholic education, and her life was no different from other children in a prosperous world. Until one day she ended up in the hospital with strange symptoms. She contorted her face, heard voices, made disgusting wheezing sounds. Between attacks, she begged the doctors to help her. However, the doctors couldn't control her condition, which they attributed to epilepsy. In early 1973, her parents decided to turn to the Catholic Church to heal the devilry in the girl through prayer. The church noticed that the girl was taking psychotropic drugs prescribed by doctors, making exorcism difficult. In 1974, a priest was found who undertook to expel the demon from Anneliese Michel, but the higher religious authorities banned him from doing so. By this time, Anneliese's illness had worsened. She began to more actively insult her family members, fight and bite. She refused to eat, citing that Satan forbade her to do so. She slept only on the floor, spent almost all days growling and screaming, and at the slightest opportunity, destroyed church symbols, tore icons, and broke crosses. In 1975, the priest decided to conduct the process of exorcising the devil according to the Roman rite. During one of the prayers, Anneliese confessed that she was possessed by several demons: Lucifer, Judas Iscariot, Nero, Cain, Hitler, Fleischmann, a Frankish monk who fell under Satan's power in the 16th century. Throughout 1975, Anneliese Michel underwent a course of purification prayers from the devil once or twice a week. Sometimes her condition worsened at this moment. Efforts of at least 3 men were required to restrain her aggression against her relatives, but overall, she could continue her normal life. Sometimes she inflicted injuries on herself. Her limbs were convulsed, which contributed to partial paralysis of her legs. The last crisis occurred on June 30th, 1976. Anneliese was suffering from pneumonia. At some point, she began to convulse. Her face stretched, but she didn't lose consciousness, and until her last breath understood what was happening to her. She died in unbearable agony. During her treatment, her mother and relatives were able to record more than 40 cassettes with exorcism. After Anneliese's death, the prosecutor began an investigation and charged 2 priests who performed the ritual based on the diagnosis of doctors who claimed that Anneliese was suffering from psychosis and epilepsy. The girl's parents and 2 priests received 6 months in prison. Upon further listening and expert assessment of the tapes by other priests practicing exorcism, it was established that the recordings captured disputes between 2 demons who tormented Anneliese Michel and argued about who should leave the girl's body first. This story became the basis of the plot of the movie The Exorcism of Emily Rose. The film by director Scott Derrickson was released in the fall of 2005 and became his most notable work. The literary source of the film, in turn, was the documentary book by anthropologist Felicitas Goodman, Exorcism of the Devil from Anneliese Michel. Once I stayed overnight at my friend's house. He had a big house, inherited from his grandmother, with plenty of rooms. It was a reasonable offer, especially for a bachelor like me, who wasn't expected home by anyone. "You see, at night we turn off some of the lights," Serge warned me. "So be careful. My son always scatters his toys everywhere. Once he almost got hurt." I said I understood, grabbed my bedding and went to sleep. But either I was too overwhelmed with impressions that evening, or it was the new place affecting me, because I slept exceptionally poorly. I kept having nightmares. It was stuffy even with the window wide open, and I kept imagining all sorts of nonsense. Around 2 in the morning, on top of everything else, I was hit by a terrible thirst. And if I could somehow fight off the nightmares, thirst forced me to wake up completely and go in search of refreshing water. There was no light in the house, just as Serge had promised. However, my eyes had already adjusted to the darkness, so I didn't have any trouble. Making my way to the fridge, I grabbed a pack of cold juice and half of it in one gulp. Then I heard a quiet, barely audible child's cry. I frowned. Only Plato, Serge's 4-year-old son, could be crying. I stood in the kitchen for a while listening, but the crying continued, and Sarah and Serge were obviously fast asleep. I returned the juice to the fridge and decided to see what was going on with the child. On one hand, it certainly wasn't my concern, but I couldn't just pretend I hadn't heard anything and go to sleep either. Following the sound, I reached the door at the far end of the corridor and stopped. The crying was definitely coming from behind the door, so I opened it slightly and peeked into the room. It was a typical children's room: a bed on the left, a table by the window, and a large wardrobe as a dark spot on the right side. "Plato?" I asked softly. "It's Uncle Den. Why are you crying?" Someone stirred in the corner, and the crying stopped. "Ah, there's Plato," I thought to myself and walked into the room. Closing the door behind me, I approached the child, who was sitting in the corner, wrapped in a blanket, quietly sobbing and hugging some toy. Well, I asked as kindly as possible, "Why are we crying?" Plato remained silent, then whispered softly, "The scarecrow." What? I didn't understand at that moment. Behind me, the child whispered even quieter and fell silent. Damn, I probably built a Chinese wall at that moment. I literally felt that someone was standing behind me, and my knees were shaking with fear. I turned sharply. There was no one behind me. In the wardrobe, Plato stood next to me. "It's waiting for you to leave." I got angry with myself. A grown man afraid of some children's spooks. I pulled myself together and, muttering the words I usually said in such moments like, "It's all a dream and there's nothing here," I approached the wardrobe. Plato stayed in the corner. "See? There's nothing here," I said, and I quickly opened the doors. The wardrobe was indeed empty. I persuaded Plato to go to sleep, wished him good night, and promised that if anything happened, I would punish any spook within this house immediately. In the morning, Serge woke me up. We had breakfast together and got ready for fishing. It was near the lake when I remembered my nightly adventure and laughed as I told my friend about it. Serge fell silent and said, "Turn around." I looked at my friend in surprise. He was as pale as death. Plato slept next to us all night, and my older brother used to sleep in the far room down the corridor. "Brother?" I asked, feeling a shiver down my spine. Serge nodded. "They found him dead when he was 4. He said he saw someone that was coming out of the wardrobe, and my son says he sees it too." Dream or not? It's 4:47 in the morning, but I've been awake for a long time. I'm lying here, just lying in bed. But you know what's scariest about my story? My family is here too. They're also here, watching me. And all I can do is look away, trying my best not to scream in horror. What could be so frightening about them looking at me, watching? But the whole picture is ruined by some smell. It smells strongly of blood. Freshly spilled blood. There's someone here. Something. And as soon as I move or take a deep breath, thereby showing him that I'm awake, it will be the end for me. I'll die and no one will come to help. I've been thinking about how to save myself, how to survive and not fall into his hands. And the only way out I could think of is to run. Run with all my might. Run without looking back onto the street. Scream, shout, call for help. Hope that someone will hear me. Anyone. The odds are not great, but if I stay here, I won't live. It's waiting for me to wake up. When I see its surprise, I'm sure it's waiting for the moment I run out and it grabs me. To understand my story, I'll tell it from the very beginning. But it's hard for me. It's hard to tell and take seriously what happened. 3 hours ago, I woke up from some heart-wrenching scream. They were screaming in my apartment. I was very scared, but still went to check what was going on. When I reached the door, I heard rustling and heavy footsteps, accompanied by heavy breathing. I felt uneasy and ran to my bed and covered myself with a blanket. It could kill me at any moment. I tried to calm down, fall asleep, convincing myself that all this was just a dream, just a scary dream. Then I heard the door of my room open. I peeked out from under the blanket quietly, feeling scared to death. I saw something dragging the bodies of my parents and sister into the room. And it wasn't a human, it wasn't. Something naked, eyeless, four-armed, with the gait of some Neanderthal. It was hunched under the weight of my mom, dad, and sister. But this thing was smarter than a caveman. It knew what it was doing. It sat Dad on the floor, leaning his body against the bed, and turned his head so that his eyes, empty, dead eyes, they pierced me. It sat Mom on a chair, like Dad facing me, and my sister, my beloved only sister. It sat her on Mom's lap, exposing her little leg, from where blood began to seep, which it began to write something with. Finally, it drew something on the wall, but it was too dark. I couldn't read it. And now this monster is sitting under my bed, waiting for me to come out, to fall into its claws, into its bloody claws. I'm scared. I'm so scared. My eyes have already gotten used to the darkness. So I can read what's written there, but I don't want to, because just thinking about it scares me. I'm afraid to think that all this is happening to me, but I feel like I have to see it before I die. And I look. What I see makes me intensify the flow of hot tears, which flowed like a river down my white with horror cheeks. I saw something like a pentagram, but I was more concerned about the inscription. The inscription was like this: I know you're awake. Don't try to escape. I'll find you everywhere.